this little question came up, what's a gentleman? And I think it was more of like a spiritual thing for me, like God telling me, this is your wake-up call. You don't need an extra hour or two a day. You need to maximize the time you have with your kids and teach them the qualities that you want them to possess. And that was a gentleman for my boys. So completely by chance, I did not do this by design. I just did it as I went. And looking back, I could see that there was a little bit of providence in the way that we designed this. But I went to my boys and I said, I want to be a better man. I want to be a better dad. And I want to teach you how to be great men.
Well, welcome back to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. We're really excited for an amazing guest today, good friend of mine named Kirk Chugg. And before I get into an introduction to you, and I might actually have you do that introduction.
Sure.
You can talk yourself up as much as you want. It doesn't even have to be true. It just has to be awesome.
Okay, no problem.
But before we get started, I want to tell a little bit story about something that happened to me earlier this year that may lead into the conversation I want to have today. So I love cycling, and most of all, I love climbing. And there's something about climbing that kind of gets me into this just meditative state where I just head down. I can just look at the ground and just plug along, and I just kind of meditate and push and kind of that exertion for a long time. Well, on this particular day, we were riding up this climb up the canyon with a couple of friends. We weren't going particularly hard, so we could have a conversation, laughing and having a great time. And, several miles till we get to the top. And it wasn't an easy climb by any means. It was a good amount of work. And we get to the top, and, after 4.5 miles of this climb or so, looking over the valley afterwards, it was wonderful. Just the reward of everything, good friends, exercise, the beautiful view at the top. And then we turn around and we come back, and I noticed something that I did not notice the entire time we had been climbing up the mountain. I had a massive headwind on the way down, which was a tailwind on the way up, but it was just at the right force that I didn't really notice it on the way up. But it was so strong on the way down. Obviously, I was riding faster, but it started to make me think. I'm just coasting down this mountain. I'm like, wow, this is like really pushing on me really hard. I didn't feel it. I didn't notice it very much as I climbed. And I started to kind of think, wow, how often does this happen in my life? When something is helping me, something's pushing me along, but I didn't notice it.
Yeah.
And I started to think about, wow, how often do I have people in my life that are blowing wind in my sails? And then I just started to reflect on people in my life, my family, friends, mentors, whoever along the way who have supported me, who have blown in the wind in my sails. And many of those instances, I'm very aware of it. There's a lot of them that I'm not even aware of, where I didn't get there just by myself. Somebody else was pushing me along. And so I started to really reflect on that. And I felt like that was a wonderful gift that I was given to say, hey, notice somebody was helping you. And this is your opportunity to feel and express gratitude for that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
So you've expressed to me over time. So I'm going to introduce Kirk now. So Kirk is a friend of mine. We've known each other for actually not that long. In the last year or two, we've become acquainted. And Kirk is the host of a podcast called
The Gentleman Project.
The Gentleman Project. You got to check it out. We'll show you how to find that. Just look it up on any of the podcast platforms. You'll find it. And but before you explain specifically what the Gentleman Project podcast is, I kind of want to go deep and hear the story of how it became what it is.
Okay.
So
there's the Gentleman Project, and then there's the Gentleman Project podcast.
There we go.
The Gentleman Project came long before the podcast did. And it was a name given to habits that we had developed in our home when my twin sons were 5. And I'm a clothier, so I make things for gentlemen, for men. And so I would refer to the people that I worked with as gentlemen. When I would come home, my boys would say, "What did you do today? Who did you spend your time with?" And I would refer to them as gentlemen. So one of them one night said, "What's a gentleman?" And I don't know what I told him to appease him or answer his question, but I do remember laying in bed that night and thinking to myself, that's your job. to teach these boys what a gentleman is. And it's more than a guy with nice manners. It's more than someone who, you know, like if you look it up, it's a guy that owns land. If you ask 100 different people, which we do on the podcast at the very end, what they think it means to be a gentleman, you'll get 100 different answers. But I felt like this push to be more involved. And you kind of have to understand where I was at this point. So this is where I'm going to relate to a lot of people, I think. I was building a business. I was gone 10 to 12 hours a day. I had maybe 10 or 15 minutes right before my kids went to bed that I could teach, instruct, even just be with, like read a book. And I didn't feel like I was doing a very good job at leaving a mark on my children.
So was this a moment where you suddenly gained an awareness of that?
No, I knew it.
Uh,
Absolutely knew 100% that I was not. I thought, if I work hard enough, I can work less hours. I'll make enough money that I don't have to work as much, and then I'll be a better dad.
Right. So did you feel that sense of, well, I'm doing this for them. I'm spending all this time for
Oh,
them. I'm
absolutely.
sacrificing this now
Absolutely.
so that I can give them something later.
Absolutely. And I thought, well, if there was an extra hour or two in the day, it would be great. And
Mm.
and then this little question came up, what's a gentleman? And I think it was more of like a spiritual thing for me, like God telling me, this is your wake up call. You don't need an extra hour or two a day. You need to maximize the time you have with your kids and teach them the qualities that you want them to possess. And that was a gentleman for my boys. So completely by chance. I did not do this by design. I just did it as I went. And looking back, I could see that there was a little bit of providence in the way that we designed this. But I went to my boys and I said, I want to be a better man. I want to be a better dad. And I want to teach you how to be great men.
These twin boys, and they're your oldest?
They're the middle. I have
The
a
middle.
girl on either side. So
Okay. So the bookends are girls, and then you got the twin boys and the sandwich in the middle.
yeah,
And they remind us, what age were they again?
they were 5, almost 6.
5, almost 6.
So
And so
pretty little.
they ask you this question of, it could be, any random question they ask you, but what's a gentleman? You say that word, what's a gentleman?
Yeah.
And your gears start turning.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to do more. So you go to them and say, hey,
I said, I want to be a better dad.
okay,
I want to teach you the things that are going to make you happy and successful in life. And so would you spend 10 minutes each night with me before we go to bed and we'll talk about those things? Like to ask a 6-year-old if he wants to spend more time with his dad, you're going to get a 10 out of 10. These kids want time and attention and love. And especially if it's something structured that they can look forward to each day. So I thought maybe we'd do this for a week or two and I would teach them the top 10 things. But what I found was these kids would like literally sit on the edge of their bed after we did family prayer and scripture. They would run into their room and sit on the edge of their bunk bed and wait for me to come in. And we started to talk about the things that I could see that were currently impacting our family. So they, at that age, 5, 6, they were like, I'm too little. I can't do that. It's too hard. And so the very first lesson that I taught them was a gentleman does hard things without complaining. And we talked about everything worth doing is hard. And if you shy away from things that are hard, it's going to be really hard to get through life because life is by design hard. And that's where growth happens. And so we were having these really interesting conversations that I never thought I'd have with a 5-year-old.
yeah. So tell me about that. You said there were conversations, so you're not just saying, sit down, I'm going to tell you something, son, now go to bed.
Right.
So how was that back and forth with them?
I just asked
the time.
questions.
Mm-hmm.
And then to their credit, like they were pretty sharp little 5-year-olds. And so we had these discussions that were 2 ways. So I created like this little picture of them. It was them with their arms around each other in front of the campfire at man camp, which is this weekend. We do it every year.
Mm-hmm.
And that was their first man camp. So they felt like they kind of come of age. We're going camping with all the other guys. And I framed that, put it behind glass. And then I just wrote a gentleman ... And we used that as kind of a blackboard. And so I wrote, a gentleman does hard things without complaining. And we would talk about that every night until we both felt like we had learned this concept. This principle was something that we have internalized. And then, like I said, kind of by stupid happenstance, it's like, well, let's go do something that shows each other that we've done this and that we have internalized this concept.
So you were coming up with an idea of, oh, a gentleman, whatever you felt like or noticed, like, oh, well, this is what a gentleman would do. A gentleman does hard things without complaining. And then you would stick on that topic and kind of
Yeah.
just ruminate on that for a while before you got to a next one.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I thought I'm not going to move on because I want him to internalize it. So I asked him, what should we do to show each other that we've learned this concept that we can do hard things? And there's a 10,000-foot mountain right out our front door. And I'd taken him to the top of it on my back multiple times before, and they loved it up there. But they came up with the idea, we've never hiked Ben Lomond by ourselves. And I'm going, that's a long hike. And they said, that's what we want to do. So that's what we did. It was September. It was the time that we usually hike Ben Lomond, and they walked the whole way. And I've got these awesome pictures of them, like just little boys on a big trail hiking towards this peak. And so they had this experiential experience about, I did this. I showed my brother, I showed my dad, I showed my family, and I showed myself that I can do hard things. So they're 16 next week. And if you asked them, what was the thing that you did when you learned that a gentleman does hard things, like, it's in their head. They know they hiked Ben Lomond Peak when they were 5. And so once we did that, the next thing that I didn't really do by design, but like if you've seen a Rustico journal, which I know you probably have one. It looks exactly like this. This is the Wasatch. Oh, yeah. This is the one I gave you.
Yep. Got it right here.
Like, wow, you had exactly the same one I did.
So you took one of these. We're not sponsored, but if you're listening.
Oh, Rustico's awesome. They were so good. They made a logo for us and everything to put on the front of it. But the very first one said, things my father taught me, a gentleman's guide.
So you get a blank journal and you're like, well, let's fill it with some stuff.
Yeah. And so when I went to erase that board the first day, and I thought, I better take a picture of this just so like I don't forget that this is something that we did. And then I had met the founder of Rustico, and I thought maybe we ought to put this in like a leather bound journal. And so I got it. It was like $50. And so like
I just transcribe
we transcribed that, and they were like chicken scratch handwriting at that point. Like you look at their original books, and they were looking at the board to see what like a G looked like. And so
did each of them have their own? Yes. Or was this one?
Yeah,
okay.
All my kids got their own. And then as we did this, I looked at it and I'm like, this book was $50. Like there's a whole blank page on that other side. I should use this space. Like, don't waste it. So they would write on the right hand side of it. And then I would write just a short letter to them on the left hand side. Like, dear John, this is what we did together. Like kind of making a journal entry of, these were the things that we talked about. This is where I learned this. This is why I hope you keep this as a quality throughout your life. I was proud of you when we hiked the mountain, right? Love, Dad. Like it wasn't big and deep philosophical stuff. It was kind of more of a journal of what we did together, and just a letter from Dad, right? So you have this book now, you have an experience, you have a conversation, they've written it down, they've looked at it all week, and then they have a connecting, conversation with their dad that's kind of, for lack of a better word, immortalized in this book. And that book became like their most prized possession at that point, because it was a history of these lessons. And so we went through, and I would come up with the lessons for like the first 3 months. I was coming up with the lessons. And then guess what happened?
They started bringing them up to you.
They were the ones that came up with the ideas. So we had a little list over on their nightstand that they'd say, Dad, I saw Grandpa do this. Is this something that we could learn? I'm like, yeah, buddy. Like, let's write it down. So we had like a list in waiting of the things that they wanted me to teach them. And so for the first time, I mean, I'm a relatively new dad at that point, but for the first time, I felt like I was making an impact on my kid's life. I wasn't just providing for them. I wasn't just putting food on the table and paying the mortgage. I was actually like giving them something that if I died tomorrow, they would still have.
So you said something earlier that like you felt this inspiration, this kind of nudge that you know you wanted to spend more time with them, but that it was that you felt, well, no, I need to make more valuable time with them.
Yeah.
And it may not be quantity of time, but the quality of the time. So as it played out, did you actually spend more time with them, or it was just better quality time?
It was both.
Mm.
So during the week, I still had the same amount of hours that I was working and I'd come home, but they knew I have dad for 10 minutes right before bed.
You just made
But
it
then
count.
but then the experiences, we started to do these experiences, which they were kind of pushing me like, hey, on Saturday when you're not working, what are we going to do here?
Right.
And
So now
so
you're being very deliberate about planning that.
yeah, and so we would learn about like a gentleman takes care of the poor and the needy and takes care of people who can't take care of themselves and all these things that I think a gentleman is. And then we would go to like Catholic community services or the food bank or hand out jackets for Thanksgiving at the local mission. And my kids remember this. Like they remember going to the soup kitchen because we had learned about this is the concept. Now let's go do it. And so they have that experience. And so I think for the first time at that point, this thing of like being a dad is not as difficult as I made it out to be. It is hard, but it's just deliberate design of how to do this. So the Gentleman Project was literally the name that my boys gave this. Like they're the ones that came up with it. And we've tried a couple of different like names and things like Devoted Dad and things like that that alliterate that maybe have a little bit more accessibility like, well, what is it? But it just never felt authentic. So it's the Gentleman Project. And so
So really at its heart, the Gentleman Project is you and your boys connecting, learning life lessons.
yeah. And then what it became after that was I saw this like profound effect and like behavioral change in my family. Like my boys would say something like we'd be learning like a gentleman respects his mother and a gentleman is gracious and shows gratitude. And so like the night before we would like conspire. We're like, hey, what are we gonna do tomorrow to show mom that we're grateful for her? And so I remember distinctly one night my boys were sitting there at the dinner table and they looked up and they said, "Thank you, mom, for this delicious dinner and for fixing it." And it was so cute. And I remember my wife looking at me and she said, "I don't know what you're doing at night in that bedroom with those boys, but I want you to keep doing it." And so we did. And I saw this like profound thing that happened in my family. And so I started to talk to the people that I spent all day with. What are you doing to connect with your family? Like what's something I thought I can't be the only one that's maybe found something that works. So I started deliberately to have these conversations with people that I would network with, people that I would, be selling things to, people that I was friends with. And I would just ask, what are you doing to connect with your kids? I'd go to these networking events where we're supposed to be talking about business and networking and referral passing. And I would have my 3 minutes and I would just say, I'd love to know what all of you guys are doing to connect with your kids. Either like tell us now or maybe like connect with me later because I'm anxious to hear like, is this working for other people? And I would tell this little short, simple story that I just told you. And I had so many people, like hundreds of people that would go home and try this. And they would come back and say, this is amazing. I don't know what there's some magic about this word gentleman, but my boys eat it up. My wife loves it. My daughters want to marry gentlemen now. Like they had kind of created this new
And their father wants them
vocabulary
to as well.
and their fathers and their exactly and their fathers, these dads are going, I'm having an impact. Like the same thing was happening in their house that happened in mine. And I thought, there's some magic here. I don't know what it is. And the people that would go home and honestly try it, they would even buy these books. I've made hundreds of these books and given them away mostly. And they would go home and do exactly what I had done, or they'd make like slight variations. I had one guy who had a missionary that he's like, I missed the boat. Like, I really want to teach my kid what a gentleman is, but he's halfway around the world. And so they would mail this book back and forth and the kid would write like, dad, this is something that I think a gentleman is. And I remember when you taught this to me, right? And so this book becomes like the coolest family history you can possibly imagine, right? Like imagine finding this book in 100 years, written between your great grandfather and your great great grandfather. That's the coolest thing you could ever find.
And how much time is it taking? Not much.
Not much. So anyway, I would come home at night. My boys could care less about how much money I made or who I met or what I sold. They'd say, "How many people did you talk to about the Gentleman Project today?"
They're
That was their
saying, "Dad,
metric.
go evangelize it."
That was their metric. And I would have a box of these books in the back of my car in the trunk, and they would say, "How many did you give out today?" Like they were my little metric keepers because they were so interested. Like we created this thing that helped us, and now we're helping other people. And I remember one night I was shutting the door to their room after we had had these conversations, and I don't know which one it was because they were on bunk beds and it was dark, but I heard this little voice from the corner and he said, "Dad, how come the whole world doesn't do the Gentleman Project?" And I was like, "I'm trying, buddy."
You got your work cut out for you.
And he says, "'Cause it's awesome." And I'm going, "All right, this is cool." Right. And so these conversations that I'd have at these networking places and things, I would just ask, like, "What are you doing?" And I would get ideas like, "Oh, dude, that is an amazing idea. Like, I should try that with my kids at home. That's so cool." Like, "Oh, we go for Sunday walks." It's simple and it's easy, but my kids look forward to on Sunday, I get 10 minutes walking around the block with my dad. And that was their thing. Right. Or, we do the same thing every day. Like, this is our family tradition and my kids look forward to it. And so I'd get really good ideas passed back to me. And then I would get guys that I'd say, "What are you doing to connect with your kids?" And big old crocodile tears, like almost immediately. They're like, I'm not, and I can't. And it keeps me up at night. Like,
So this brings up kind of a tough question because I listen to you and it just inspires me. I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. Like, what have I, what time have I lost? What can I do now with my son? I'm trying. I mean, with the sparks of gratitude, very similar. Like you've tried to spread this. I mean, right here underneath you, I've got stacks of gratitude journals that I've given out hundreds of them
it's awesome.
because I want people to do
Mm-hmm.
that daily thing. Now, at least in this respect, it's I'm writing daily. What am I grateful for? And I believe that when I go internal, then all of a sudden that starts to express itself externally.
Yeah.
And I want to flood the world with that gift.
And you're going to do it with this podcast, by the way.
All
I
right.
can feel it in my bones.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate
Seriously.
that. So, and that's strictly because of the guest. So often I have a tendency, and I'm sure I'm not alone, that when I hear someone like you tell a story like this, I feel like, oh man, I suck. Like, look how awesome this guy is. He's doing
Mm.
something amazing with his kids. Like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not good enough. They're better than me. Like, and I want it to encourage me. Sometimes I have a tendency to feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough. And I feel guilt about it, guilt or shame that I'm not doing something about it. So what's your experience with that as you share your experience, the Gentleman Project with, these hundreds of people over time? Do you see that ever? Or,
Yeah.
how often is it that people feel inspired? I mean, right now I feel inspired. My guess is that a lot of people do as well. But do you occasionally feel, I mean, you explained,
Yeah.
a guy cries saying, I'm not,
Yeah. It's a totally individual thing. I felt guilt and shame like before this whole thing started, and I felt like I was doing a halfway decent job of like leaving some breadcrumbs of where I want my kids to go. I was right there. Like it bothered me, and I thought, I've got time. Like they're only 5 and 8 and 2. Like I have plenty of time, and there will be time. And now I have an 18-year-old, 2 16-year-olds, and a 12-year-old. And it seems like it was just like last weekend.
and you've had 10 years to be working on this with
Yeah.
them.
And there's been times in that 10 years that we haven't done a very good job, and you would think like, well, maybe the founder of this would like be a little bit more consistent, but we've had to change the way, like we don't write in these little books anymore, like little kids, like my boys outgrew that. I kind of wish we did, but we have to do different things now. We've we have other family traditions that we do, that I hope like connect my my kids to our family and our culture. I've been really careful to. Corey Moore is the co-host of the podcast with me, and he's been like one of the Gentleman Project's earliest and most ardent supporters. He heard about it, like what I was doing at home with my kids, and he calls me and he's like, "Kirk, why have you never told me about this?" So I told him about it. He tried it, and it changed his family culture. And ever since then, he's like, "We got to do something with this. Like, we got to evangelize this somehow. Like, we got to get the word out. We got to inspire." And from the very beginning, we have felt like you can't do it by guilt because there's plenty of that, right? And let's have the conversation about
Hmm.
guilt and shame.
Yep.
Like, shame's unhealthy. Guilt can be a motivator. It can. Like, if you have it like this tinge of I ought to and I could do better, that's not unhealthy. Shame is different, right? That's the you're not good enough and you never will be. And so I hope that through inspiring stories, which is what the Gentleman Project podcast became, was essentially me having a conversation with the guests, Corey and I, asking, "What are you doing to connect with your kids? Where did you learn the things that are most important to you? What made you who you are, and how are you teaching that? If you haven't taught that, what are the lessons that you learned through hard times in your life?" And so we've had amazing people on the podcast that are doing incredible things in their life. We've had some people on the podcast that have made big mistakes and have missed the boat or missed the opportunity, but they've learned something from it. And if I can help, if I can record that conversation, because I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of these conversations. And I thought during COVID, I'm like, we ought to just record these, like, for other people to listen to. This is great. Like, we've had people that are diagnosed with ALS that are recording their voice before they lose it for their kids. And they're telling their kids the things that are very most important to them and the things that they hope for their lives. And we've had people that have been very successful and built great companies who've tried to balance this business, family, culture. And then we've had a lot of people who have taken exactly what's made them successful in business with vision and mission and culture. And then they've realized, I haven't done any of that over here in my family. Like, this is what makes us run and tick and so successful over here. But I haven't done any of those things over here in my family. Like, do we even know what we stand for as a family? Like, what's our last name mean? So I've kind of taken, I think that if, like you said to me, what if I feel like completely overwhelmed and I'm a bad dad and guilt and shame that I'm not doing this stuff? Dude, we're all in the same spot. Like, everybody, there's no smooth road here. Everybody feels inadequacy. Everybody feels a little bit of, I'm not good enough. There's no guidebook for this. I haven't told this to hardly anybody. This will be the first time I'm telling it to anybody publicly, but I took the lessons that I've learned through the Gentleman Project, both in my own home, growing up, and the things that I've learned on the podcast, and written a book. And it tackles this idea of, it's called Parent's Guide to Eating an Elephant, Raising Kids One Value at a Time. So, like, you look at it and go, this is an elephant. How the heck am I ever going to change what I'm doing? But if you just pick one thing and you do one thing on purpose by design, and then you pick another thing and you do the same thing with that, you'll find these little incremental changes make huge differences. And that's the underlying principle. If you were to go back and listen to all 113 episodes of the podcast, you would find that one little change can make a world of difference.
It's that 10-minute walk on Sunday, sitting on the bed with the kids, talking about saying thank you to mom.
Yeah.
Those little things. My wife and I have been talking about this a lot. And, we've had a couple of rough things happen to us this week. And, in family, luckily not directly to us and our family and relationship, but very close family where we've watched things fall apart. And it's breaking my heart. And I can't control somebody else's life and their decisions. But it makes my wife and I look at each other with hope and joy and meaning, that what do we want our future to look like? And we're kind of, metaphorically closing our eyes together and imagining this future of what our family could be, and our kids coming to visit on holidays and bringing their kids with them. and laughing and just having fun together. And then we think, all right, well, if that's the image on our vision board, if these are the values we want to strive for connection and faith, and what do I do today? What bite am I taking out of that elephant? And we've been talking about that. And that's these little things. How am I filling my cup daily so that I'm full and that I can be energized to be able to support my wife so that she can support our children and obviously me support my children too. But that, you know,
Yeah, those are all really healthy steps. Like one of the most powerful questions I think you can ask your family, including your kids, is what do you want our family to look like in 15 years? You know, if you've got teenagers, like when you're 30, what do you want our family? You're going to build your own family. What do you want our family to look like? You guys want to be home for holidays? Do you want to still go on vacations together? How often do you want to see each other? Are you going to live close? You know, some of these things you don't know, but how close do you want to be? You
yeah.
know,
What do they imagine? What
what do
we
they want?
manufacture expectations in our own head. I don't know what they're thinking,
Yep.
right?
I mean, you can
Let's hear it.
right. You get I don't know, there's a guy named Mark Driscoll. He's a like an influencer. He's a Christian pastor preacher. And I heard one thing he said that kind of resonated with me, that kind of hit me. It was like when your kids get married, you're not gaining a daughter or a son-in-law. They're starting their own family and they become the family unit, you know. And the Bible says that you'll leave your mother and your father and you'll
Right.
cleave to one another. They're not becoming part of your family. They're creating their own. And so if you've got completely different ideas about that and your kids grow up and like you can quickly ostracize a kid if you're like, well, I can't believe you're not coming to Christmas or Thanksgiving or you're going to be with her family again. You know, like I've got two nieces that are like of marrying age and they're dating. And I told them, I'm like, you don't just marry the person, you marry the whole family. You marry the parents, you marry the brothers and the sisters. As much as you think that it's just about love for one person and that you'll get over all that stuff, there's a lot of mountains to climb if you can't get along with the family. So that's a tangent, but it's one of those things that you say, in 20 years, what do you want our family to look like? And if your kids say, I want to be completely independent, I'll see you guys like a couple times a year, I'll call once a week, at least you know what their expectations are. And if they say, oh, we want to be over here, like we want to go on vacations, we still want to do guys trips, I'm going to call you every morning at 8 o'clock. You know,
It's like,
that's
whoa.
but at least you know, like you expectations not set or expectations
Yeah.
not met, right? So if you can't have that conversation, like do it. What do you want our family to look like in 5 years? What do you want our family to look like in 30 years? And I think that question and that conversation is a healthy one to have as your kids are old enough to start making their own decisions.
I love it. I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited about this book. I mean,
Thanks.
I've had inklings. You've kind of given me a little like I've known that this has been percolating, and yeah, I can't wait to.
In the book, there's nothing new under the sun, but I had my dad read it. I gave it to my mom and my dad, like an advanced copy. And it meant a lot to me because my dad said, I wish there had been something like this for me when I was raising you. And I had to like think about that for quite a while. What did that mean like to him to
Mm,
read the book? What does that mean for me, like as his son? And so I hope it's like a guidebook, a tool, not something that makes you feel guilty because I don't want people to feel guilty like, "Oh, look at me. I'm so amazing." And
yeah,
you know, like I struggle as a dad to connect with my kids every single day. I have 4 teenagers. Sometimes the connections are not real deep right now.
yeah.
But
Well, I'll tell you something that I brought that whole thought up of you hear somebody talk about concepts or we need to do this with our kids or whatever. Sometimes that messaging is presented in a way that says, "Hey, you need to do this," and you're not. And obviously, I feel you know, like, whoa, somebody's telling me that I should, right? We had someone tell us recently that we need to stop shoulding on ourselves,
yeah.
right? Where, where rather what I feel from you when you share these messages, when I listen to your podcast, when I listen to the guests and you tell the stories about your boys and this whole project that you've gone on, is you're saying, hey, I feel something that I feel responsible to do as a father. And I'm trying. You want to try? I'm doing this and I'm trying to be a little bit better. You want to come with me?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I love most, like the reason why we know each other is we get together once a month on the second Wednesday. And for 2 hours, we could have a scheduled conversation about this is what we're going to talk about, or we can just get together and be ourselves and tell everybody like what's really going on in my
Mm.
life. And I don't think that I know that you have men and women that listen to this podcast. I think men specifically don't give themselves the license to have those conversations very often. And one of the things that I tried when I started to do the Gentleman Project was a lunch club where I would find other men that I want to learn like to how to be like them. And ooh, that was like, ring. I'm going to start over so you can splice that. I found 5 guys that I wanted to learn from. And I said, hey, like, can we just go to lunch once a month? And I'm trying to be a better dad. I want to learn what you're doing in your home. Would you be open to just like going to lunch for an hour? And what we did was we just created like this little book of this is what Ryan said that he's struggling with, and this is what he's going to do this month to try to be better. And then the next time we got together, I'd say, "Hey Ryan, how does this thing going with your son? And did this work? I tried that, worked great, or tried that, didn't work at all. Gonna try something else this month." And so it's kind of like this that we don't have a collective of ideas. And so the podcast was supposed to be part of that collective. Let's share these conversations. Let's share what's working. Let's share what doesn't work for us. And then we can trial and error in our own lives.
And you know what I love about the format too is one, if nothing else, you have a conversation with somebody that can inspire you.
Oh, if nobody listened to the podcast, I'd still do it.
Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening right here, right now, by the way. I love that you have that conversation with people and you can get inspired from them. And my thought is sometimes I've had a concept or a lesson presented to me for years and years, but it never clicked. It never resonated. I never understood it. It never hit my heart. And then I hear it through a different voice, different presentation, different words are used, but it's the exact same concept. But when I hear it delivered in the right way for me, for my heart, my soul, I'm like, oh, I've been presented that concept my whole life, but I never got it. But when I heard this person say it, now I get it.
And it could be that person, or it could just be the place you're at.
Yeah.
Right.
It could be any of those. And so I love the idea. I mean, you talk about your book, how you say, hey, these are no new concepts. This is just my experience. And I've learned some stuff and I'm going to present it the way that it's meaningful to me. And you know what? It may be the right voice to be meaningful to someone else.
Yeah.
So I love that. I mean, I think, truth is presented to us in many different ways and with many different words and many different metaphors.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're doing it. I love what you're doing so much.
Thanks,
And
Randy.
I'm so glad you did not change the name from Gentleman Project because that means something,
Yeah.
not just to you, but to your boys and now to hundreds of other people,
Yeah.
thousands of other
Feels
people.
more authentic. And that's kind of been our guiding principles in the Gentleman Project is it authentic? I never wanted to be prescriptive. Like, if you want to be successful, this is what you have to do. And then I never wanted to motivate by guilt. Those were our 3 guiding principles when we started the Gentleman Project. So hopefully, if you listen to the story today, that all of that kind of came through. Like, hopefully you feel that I'm authentic. Like, I've got no ulterior motives here. I just want families to be stronger and for connections between parents and children to be stronger. And I don't want to make people feel guilty. That's never been my intention. And I want to make sure that you know that you're in the driver's seat. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do and how to do it. That's what's so beautiful about this last question we ask on the podcast is, what do you think it means to be a gentleman? And everybody has a different answer. Like, no 2 people have said, like, there's been a couple that have been similar, but everybody's got a different idea. And that's what they believe and that's what they think. And that's what they ought to teach their kids. That's what makes family culture family culture. It's not that you're teaching your kids what I think a gentleman is. Like, what do you think it is? Now go teach that to your kids. So I've thought about like printing, like some prompts or something in these books Like, no, they're just like a wide open blank page. Like there's nothing in them. There's not even like there's the logo on the front. That's it. And I think that you ought to be the one to drive that conversation with your kids, because the underlying principle that I hope people also like in the prologue of the book is, I want you to know and feel that you are by far the number one most qualified person on earth to raise your kids. There's nobody else that can do it better than you can.
I think a lot of people need to hear that, myself included, because while that may be true, I actually believe that that's true. It feels true. I don't feel like that all the time. I feel the opposite a lot of the time, right? So,
And it doesn't mean you have to do it alone,
yeah,
but we get into these grooves, and you can either do things by default, which is where I totally was like, my kids just got my leftovers, whatever was left over after a long day of work and on the road and looking at my phone. They got the leftovers. And that was my default response. And I think we can get into these ruts in life where we're just living by default. And as soon as we say, I want to design something just a little bit different. And that's all the Gentleman Project was going from default mode to a little bit of design. And that little bit of design made all the difference. So if you want to change, design something little and do it 100%, and then see what that does. It's the atomic habits, right? Like you just do little things, you get successful at it, and then the next thing you're successful at that, and then you create this culture of, I can do this, I can win. This isn't as hard as I thought it was, and pretty soon you're doing 10 things different than you were doing at the beginning of the year.
yep. And everyone is casting a vote for the person you want to become.
Exactly. Exactly. James Clear should come on your podcast.
Yep.
If you're listening, James, you should come on this
Yep.
podcast.
Yeah. He's definitely listening.
He will be. Love you, Randy.
Yeah, I'd love it. Love you too. Well, I'm excited. So, can we do this again? I have a couple other things that we want to
Sure.
talk about, and I'm going to give a preview of what I want to talk about next time we do this. I want to talk about barbed wire. I want to talk about what did this used to be, and all that.
Love it.
Is grandpa.
Grandpa. Yeah.
So I'm
I'd love
excited
to.
for that. Well, I'm super grateful for you.
Grateful for you too, Randy.
Yeah, can't wait to spend more
Thanks
time
for all
with
the
you.
goodness that you put out in the world.
Thank you.